Hey guys, back with another video, a review on this game, Stella Glow for the 3DS. I showed this in a recent pickups video and I said I was going to play it soon. And this is one of those games that came out last year, 2015, and pretty much everyone I know that's played through this game loved it. I haven't heard a single negative thing about this game. And it was one of those games I missed out on last year and I decided to finally play it now. It's developed by Imageepoch, which is a developer that's not around anymore. They had like a bankruptcy problem, I guess, towards the end. So this is kind of like their swan song. Other games they've done the Luminous Arc games on the DS, which this is kind of a successor to those. They did Arc Rise Fantasia on the Wii, which I've never played. I've heard mixed things on that game. Some people seem to really love it. Some people seem to hate it. Time and Eternity is probably the last one they did, I think, before this. At least that came out in North America for PS3. That game, a lot of people hate. There's a few defenders of that game, but most people seem to hate it and think it's just a really bad JRPG. But this, from what I've seen, this is considered the best game, which is kind of sad because, of course, they're not around anymore. But luckily, this Atlas decided to bring this out in North America, and we got to play this game. Now, I like this game. I really do. I think this is a solid strategy RPG. That said, I'm not as over the moon with this game as a lot of people are. I don't think this is one of the best RPGs on the 3DS. I mean, close. It's certainly not one of my favorite strategy RPGs. I have a lot of issues with it. We'll get into those, but it's good. I mean, it's a good game. It's surprisingly enjoyable, I guess, because it's one of those games before it came out, it just didn't look that interesting to me, and I was not, with Imageepoch being the developer, I wasn't expecting it to be that good, even though the Luminous Arc games are fairly well liked, but yeah, I guess it was just one of those games that was a nice surprise for a lot of people, and maybe that's why people just really enjoyed it, because they weren't expecting anything from it. And for me, I guess, in a way, I probably had it hyped up a little too much. My expectations were probably a little too high. I think I really should have lowered my expectations a bit, and maybe I would have enjoyed it more than I did. It's worth playing. I think if you like RPGs and you have a 3DS, this is worth owning. It's worth adding to your collection. But I don't love the game. I just don't. I can't quite love it. Even though I was able to get into this, whereas Fire Emblem Awakening, I wasn't. But it does lead to some interesting questions with strategy RPGs. I'm starting to feel like with strategy RPGs, I like the genre, but there's very specific games in the genre that I kind of gravitate towards. This game kind of had the same issue as Disgaea 5, where it was one of those games where I enjoyed it, I thought it was good, but it kind of outstayed its welcome for me. This game took me 63 hours to finish to get the true ending, and I was getting a little bored by it by like the 40-hour mark. Even though the story does eventually get more interesting towards the end, the actual gameplay I thought was just not enjoyable enough for me to sustain like the 63 hours this game went on. Towards the end of the game, I was just getting real tired of it, sadly. But maybe if you love strategy RPGs and if you go in with a bit lowered expectations, I think you'll find a lot to enjoy here. But let's get into it actually with the story. We'll talk about the story first, where your character is Alto and he's an amnesiac. Yeah, we've seen that a million times before in JRPGs. You grow up in this small little town called Mithra with your kind of childhood friend Lizette. And you're out and about one day in the forest, and you come across this witch named Hilda. And basically, through some events, she turns the entire village, everyone in the village, into crystals. She does like this crystallization process where all the townsfolk are turned into crystals. And basically, obviously, Alto and Lizette are shocked by this, and they vow to kind of get revenge in a sense and defeat her. But she escapes, and they join the Regnant Knights, which are kind of these group that kind of work for the queen, and through joining them, you find out that there's other witches throughout the land, and you got to basically get them to join your team so you can do this song with the four witches to kind of reverse the crystallization process. And that's kind of the general story. There's some twists and turns. It started off fairly predictable, but towards the end, it does get fairly interesting, and it gets darker. The tone overall is fairly... It's not super light, but it's not super dark either. There's plenty of moments of humor here. You've got a hot spring scene, which I've seen so many times before in RPGs, which is amusing. I always find those kind of amusing, even though they're almost in every JRPG. But the story itself, it's not going to blow you away, really. But there's a few surprising twists and turns here. Some of the characters, I guess we'll get into the characters now, really, which... The characters I'm kind of mixed on. There's some I really like, and there's some I don't like. And I guess the interesting thing with this game is there's a lot of character development compared to, well, JRPGs have always had fairly good character development, but with this game you've got kind of like a social link system. And there's this whole tuning thing in this game. We'll talk about this next, because this is like this really weird aspect of the game where the witches you meet, you have to tune them because your character is called a conductor. I don't really want to spoil the story reasons for that, but you have to tune a witch, and to do this you kind of dive into the hearts, and you have to kind of like figure out what they've been hiding from the other characters, and it's this really weird thing where it's like you unlock different abilities by doing this tuning thing, and in the main town you can go to this character that can allow you to tune witches, and you have like these little cutscenes that play before you kind of dive into their heart, and they kind of play out like battles in a way where you have to do a certain objective, like kill a certain amount of enemies or reach a certain enemy on the map. But these cutscenes are so strange because all of a sudden your characters, the witch and your main character Alto, are naked for some reason. And there's like there's like all this weird sexual innuendo, and it's bizarre. I honestly don't know why it's like that. Like, it's just this, it's the tuning process is this weird, like this vaguely sexual thing that I don't really understand. I don't know if it needs to be. I don't, like, maybe they just wanted fan service and thought this was a way to do it. Just have the characters naked. And even when characters refer to tuning, like the witches will be like, Alto, tune me. It's time to tune me. And it's just, it's so weird. I don't know. I thought it was kind of odd. And I always laughed whenever a witch would be like, Alto, you gotta tune me, and they say it in these like, and the voice acting is really weird when they say that too. It's, I don't know, for whatever reason I thought it was kind of off-putting. I don't know, maybe that doesn't bother other people, but for me it was just kind of weird. I don't know, the whole tuning thing, I thought it has some interesting implications in the story, and especially character development, because through these processes you get to know the characters a little better. But I don't know, the whole weird sexual thing they have going on is kind of weird too, especially when a lot of the characters in this game are underage. And when you go to the tuning area, like, they're all in this couch, in this lounge area, and they've all got like these weird bathrobes. See, you've got on the case too. I don't know if you guys can see that, but they're in like these weird like robes, and it's like, it's highly sexual for some reason. I don't understand it. It's really weird. But I don't know. Maybe that's bothering me more than it really should. I mean, it's not, compared to some JRPGs. It's not like overly sexualized or anything like that. Like, it's not like Conception 2 or anything like that, where it's just like, ugh. But it is kind of corny and weird. But whatever. The characters are like, some of them are really good. Like Hilda, the witch that you find early in the game, I think is a really interesting character. I think there's one point in the game where her personality changes way too suddenly, and I found that kind of jarring. Alto, I like. Alto's a good, solid kind of main character. Not amazing or anything like that. The characters kind of fit certain archetypes in the beginning, but they do kind of grow and change a little. Like, you have another character that's your typical shy character that doesn't know how to talk to people. You have Sakula, I can't pronounce it. Sakua, I think that's how you say her name. She's the bitchy character that's just like, really bitchy on the outside, but of course on the inside, no, I secretly like you. And it's like, I don't know, I really hated her. I thought she was an awful character. She gets a little better towards the end, but that kind of character I just can't stand. You have the childhood friend Lizette, who's secretly in love with you, of course, but I actually don't mind her so much. I don't think she's that bad. You have Popo, another witch, who's kind of the young child character, and she's kind of irritating at times. You have the group of kind of, not really mercenaries, but you kind of have the group of villains that are kind of after you throughout the game. There's some interesting characters as well there. You have Klaus, who's a commander in the Regnant Knights. He's kind of stoic and, I don't know, maybe a little boring, but he gets a little more interesting to the end. You have Rusty, who's your ladies' man thief type character, but he's got an interesting backstory to him that I kind of liked. So, I mean, overall, it's kind of a mixed bag for me, the characters. I think there's a lot of them that are interesting, and they all get nice character development, but some of the archetypes I just am not a fan of, really, I guess. But I have to say, compared to a lot of JRPGs, I think it's got a fairly strong cast, and it's a very dialogue-driven game. There's a lot of dialogue in here. You really get to know these characters quite a bit. Out of every strategy RPG I've played, this is easily the most story-focused one I've played. So yeah, that's story and characters. Let's talk about the gameplay, which is where some of my complaints come in, even though it might be my favorite part of the game overall. Strategy RPG, isometric view, tile-based in a way. It's most similar to Final Fantasy Tactics, I would say. Now, the three games I was reminded of, though, when playing this were Final Fantasy Tactics, Conception 2, with the whole tuning aspect and the social links, which we'll get to, and then Persona, which, again, for the social links kind of stuff, which ever since Persona 3 and 4 came out, social links are in fucking every RPG now. I mean, I don't mind so much. I've always liked social links, but I just kind of find it funny how it's like that. But yeah, you've got kind of a world map where you kind of walk from point to point. There's no actual exploration or anything like that. You can't really visit villages other than for main missions. You've got one town that you're going back to, you're going back to over and over again. It's got your group of shops. You can kind of upgrade shops in a little bit. Every few chapters, new stock of weapons and armor will be at these shops. There's orb shops, which we'll talk about that later. There's like kind of your barracks, which you can do like the social links type elements. And each chapter, there's 12 in the game. Each chapter you have kind of like a time limit, sort of, that keeps going down. You'll have mission time and free time. Mission time, it's time to do a mission on the world map. Free time, you'll have three segments of free time to spend. Basically, so you can use this to either explore and get an item, which I didn't find much use for that. You can do a side mission, which is basically like these little side missions you can tackle at the store, where it doesn't involve any kind of effort or anything like that, where you basically just help out, do a part-time job at one of the stores, like carrying boxes or whatever. You get like a little kind of funny cutscene with your character running back and forth carrying a box, which is kind of charming a little bit, but you'll get like 1,000 gold or whatever if you do that. And if you keep doing part-time jobs at the same store, you'll get discounts to that store. So that can be pretty handy, but the main thing you're going to be doing with your free time is doing the social links, increasing affinity with your characters. So if you hang out with one of your characters, their infinity meter will increase, and sometimes you'll get new bonuses. They'll earn a new skill. Evasion rate might increase if your character Alto is beside that character in battle. So that I loved that. I love the whole social link element system. Like I said before, it fleshes out the characters and it adds benefits to your battles. So that's great. I don't mind that whatsoever. To get the true ending, you want to raise a character's affinity to a certain cap. This is not really spoiling anything, but if you want to go for the true ending, and luckily Leo, the funny nerd, told me this. I'm glad he told me this. Get Klaus to the highest affinity you can until it doesn't allow you to get any more affinity with him, and then you'll be good to go to get the true ending. Yeah, it's one thing I think anyone's going to want to know that when they start this game. But yeah, you have the social link elements. You have the orb system, which, again, I'll talk about this before I get into the actual battles themselves, where each weapon can have different orbs you can equip, and you can buy orbs at the store. You can kind of refine orbs and make them yourself. They give little bonuses like 20% extra attack, 10% extra experience from enemies defeated. It's a fairly simple system. It doesn't add a whole lot of experimentation, but it's fun enough. I definitely appreciate that it's in the game. Your characters all have different skills. You have like SP, which is kind of like your magic, I guess. Each character has like different skills you can use. Like I said before, grid-based, where you take your turns, enemies move, you move. You can have, each attack can have like distances, and the witches add a certain kind of wrinkle to the battle system, where it's kind of like your typical turn-based strategy RPG. It kind of moves a little slow, it's a little clunky at times, it doesn't have the speed that Final Fantasy Tactics or even Fire Emblem Awakening has, and it's a bit jarring at first. The game starts out very simple with not much you can do, but the more characters you get, the more abilities you get, the more it opens up, the more enjoyable it gets, really. But it has a slow start, that's for sure. But yeah, the witches add an interesting thing where they have these songs they can perform, and you have like a meter at the top left called the, what was it called? The PP meter, I think, where it kind of charges up the more you take damage and the more you deal damage. And if you have 4 PP out of a maximum of 5, you can use a song with one of your witches, where as the conductor, Alto, you have to stand next to one of the witches, and then you can conduct a song. And each witch has their own different kind of songs that you can get. For instance, Sakia has one where it increases the critical hit rate of every ally in the entire map. And this song will play out for at least, I think the amount of turns depends, but sometimes it can be up to like 4 turns, but only the first turn will you get the critical rate up ability, where the next turns your character keeps performing that song, you'll get other bonuses, like I think defense down on every enemy on the map. So these are very handy. And yeah, witches are fairly strong, although 2 of them I thought were kind of shitty. Mortemort and Sakula. Sakula, I think, is good in the beginning, but towards the end of the game, they're, to me, useless when you get some of the other witches. But the witches are actually one of my favorite parts of the game in terms of the battle system, but also one of my least favorite parts. So when you start a battle, you basically can choose 6 characters to go into battle, sometimes 7 or 8. There's a lot of battles where characters are forced on you. And in the beginning, you have free reign. You can choose whatever character you want. Your party can get pretty big, especially later towards the end of the game. But most missions, you have 6 characters. Alto has to go, like he has to be on every mission. And the rest, you can kind of choose whichever characters. And in the beginning, I was like, all right, awesome, this is great. I love experimenting with these characters, finding out my favorites. Rusty and Nonoko, which that's another character. She's a character which is just basically a walking pair of tits with a paper bag on their head. Yeah, but those 2 characters were powerful as fuck. They were OP as shit, and I loved using them. I was rewarded for kind of experimenting with them because I didn't think they were maybe that great in the beginning. There's some characters I find useless. Archibald, which is like this knight, really defensive, tanky character. He's so slow that he's useless. Speed's very important in this game. You really need to be able to really get across the maps quick because there's a lot of enemies and you need to be able to get to them. And I find Archibald in the beginning, all your characters, you would use them, kill all these enemies, and before you could even move Archibald to an enemy and attack them, they were all dead because all your other characters were able to do all their shit before Archibald could even reach an enemy. Like, he was completely useless. Maybe he got better, but yeah, lousy character. But towards the end of the game, this is one of my big complaints with the game, probably my major complaint. The witches are forced on you in almost every battle. And this is done for story reasons. I understand that. I guess, I don't know, I feel like they could have done something different here, though. But yeah, the witches are forced on you, and there's a lot of witches in this game. Out of the 6 characters you can bring into battle, you're going to have to bring all witches, because they're all forced on you. There's a lot of battles where you can't even choose one other character other than these witches, and it's really annoying. It's this game with, there's this whole cast of characters, and they all have their each different interesting abilities, yet the game forces you to use the witches. So it's like, why bother having all these characters to use in battle when you're just going to have to use the witches and level up the witches? Because, like, if you don't level up these witches and you use some of these other characters, you'll get to the end game and they're going to be so under-leveled compared to the rest of your party, and it's a pain in the ass. It's not fun. Like, the level of experimentation here, I think, compared to other strategy RPGs I've played, is extremely lacking. Because the character progression systems, like I said before, you know, there's not a whole lot of abilities you'll be getting. Like, there's a decent amount, but you have your abilities, your orb system, like I said before, which is very minor, and that's it. And you don't really want to be using a lot of these characters. They're useless. Later in the game, like, these 2 characters join you. And I was like, oh, that's cool, but I'll never use them. What's the point? Because every battle from here on is just going to force me to use the witches. And again, Mortemort and Sakia, towards the end of the game, in my opinion, they were shitty. They were terrible. Like, they were awful. They weren't doing shit. So I had to rely on the other strong witches, like Lizette and Popo, which I think are very powerful. But I don't know, towards the end of the game, it just really started to get annoying. And there's, like the missions are pretty good for the most part. A lot of them are just defeat all the enemies, but a lot of them have these really arbitrary loss conditions. Like certain missions, if a certain character dies, you immediately fail. Yet, if you do the random battles in the game, Alto can die, and you can still carry on. But if you're doing a main story mission, Alto dies, and you immediately fail. There's some trial and error aspects to some of the missions too, where there's some missions where enemies will just spawn in from random parts of the map. You have no idea where they're going to spawn in. One mission in particular, it was like this long mission where you'd keep killing enemies, and then eventually you had to escape the map in the bottom left part of the map, and enemies were just surrounding that area, and I tried to rush for those enemies, and then there's this other character in the map that just one-shots all your other characters on the map. So before I could even reach there, I was dead. So I had to restart the map, and then that time I just rushed to that escort point, so that when that time came where I could just leave the map, immediately I succeeded in the mission. So there's some trial and error bullshit like that. The arbitrary loss conditions, I think, are kind of annoying. There's some protect the NPC missions, which I've said this on Twitter, those fucking suck. Luckily, not too many of them here. They're not as bad as in FF Tactics, but I've still lost. I got a few game overs because of that sometimes, which was irritating. Towards the end, there's also like so many enemies that will respawn other enemies if you don't kill them fast enough. And then there's multiple enemies with ridiculous amounts of health. Like later in the game, like the health just gets ridiculous, which again, one of my pet peeves, inflated health and damage. There's enemies that would heal themselves to full health and heal other enemies to full health. And while that's going on, you have these other enemies that are making new enemies in the map. Towards the end, I gotta say, this game was actually starting to really drag and get annoying to me. Like, the challenge level is not too bad. Like, I don't think this game is a particularly difficult game. It's not easy. I don't think it was ever an easy game. I think the challenge is moderate. It just has these random difficulty spikes that come out of nowhere and just, I don't know, really halt the pacing of the game. The pacing in general, I think, like, the story is well-paced, but the actual gameplay, I just think, like, it's good, but it's not complex or experimental enough to sustain, like, the 62 hours that you have to put through the game. So yeah, if you're into like a more story-driven RPG than a gameplay RPG, you'll probably appreciate it more. And I do think the gameplay is probably the strongest part, just because it's well done for what it is. I mean, there's not a whole lot to complain about. It says here on the back, actually, too, apparently there's a bunch of unlockable endings. I actually didn't know that, but luckily I was able to get the true ending there. It's a very linear game. There's, like, no side quests to speak of, basically. You can grind if you want to. It doesn't help all that much from what I've noticed, unless you need characters to get up to where the other characters are, like if you've been ignoring the witches. But, yeah. Gameplay-wise, it's good. It's not amazing, and it's another thing where it's like, after playing the FF Tactics, it's like, man, I have to come to the realization that nothing's going to come close to that as far as strategy RPGs go. The only thing I can think of now is Tactics Ogre, which I'm actually dying to play that now. But yeah, that's gameplay. Visuals, nice sprites, 2D artwork. The environments are really nice to look at. Great environment variety. It's got anime character designs. They take a little to get used to, like, the battle sprites, because you have these characters with really tiny bodies and massive heads. Almost chibi art style, but not quite. That I thought was a little. It was hard to get used to that. Eventually, I didn't care so much, but right at first, it's kind of jarring, and I don't think it really clashes with the art style of the game, but it's a bit weird. But the actual character designs and the dialogue sequences are great. It's not the best looking 3DS game. That's, it's obviously didn't have the biggest budget ever, of course, being Imageepoch, but I think it looks fine. The 3D, it didn't look like it had much of an effect. Like, the 3D looked, it didn't really add much overall, but yeah, I think it's got a nice art style to it. It looks great. Well, not great, but it looks good. It looks fine. Audio, I was kind of impressed, actually. The voice acting, this game's got a ton of voice acting. Like, almost the entire thing is voiced. And it's all good. Like, all the voice acting is quite good. Popo is maybe a little irritating. She's got kind of a high-pitched voice, but other than that, like, it's really top-notch, actually. I was kind of blown away. Audio is a bit of a mixed, or not audio, soundtrack is mixed bag, though, because the soundtrack from this game is done by Yasunori Mitsuda, and then someone else. And I have to imagine that he did a very few of the songs in this game, and the other guy did the rest of them, because some of the songs in this game are amazing. The intro theme, the song that plays on the title screen, is incredible. Some of the more melodic, slower, sadder songs in this game are excellent. Like, I was really kind of caught off guard by them, but then the rest of it's kind of generic. You have some generic battle themes, you have generic kind of comedic themes for, like, the lighthearted, humorous elements in the game. It's the kind of music that I don't know, it just, the only thing I can think of is generic. It's not terrible. I mean, it's not bad, but it's it's not memorable in any sort of way. But then you have a scant few tracks that are really amazing. So I don't know. That was weird. I don't know for a fact if Mitsuda how many songs he did for this game, but I'm willing to bet the songs he did are the ones that I really liked, and then the rest of them were the other guy. But yeah, soundtrack. Um, okay, it's all right, I guess. It's all right, but yeah, that's Stella Glow. I've pretty much covered everything. I can't really think of much else. I mean, yeah, I think there's like a street pass thing in the game, which I didn't mess with, but yeah, it's a good RPG, a good strategy RPG. I'm feeling like if it were to score the game, I don't really like to score games, but I'm probably feeling like a strong 7, light 8, I guess, for this game. Probably a 7. I don't know if I would go to 8 out of 10 because I don't know. Again, there's all these little things about this game that bothered me. The story wasn't amazing. I was mixed on the characters, so it's a game that's probably better than the sum of its parts, though. Really, I think when it all comes down to it. And you know what? Unless you just hate RPGs, I think it's worth getting on the 3DS. It will certainly last you a long time. There's a lot of content here. It's a long ass game. I think it probably could have been shorter, in my opinion, but. Yeah, enjoyable. I don't love it as much as most people, unfortunately, but I am glad I played it. I am glad I played it. I enjoyed it. Would have it made my top 10 of 15 list last year? No, I don't think so. Honorable mention maybe, but I don't think it would have made my top 10. But yeah, that's Stella Glow, guys. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.